Hey, folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. My name is David. I'm your host. And today I'm thrilled to have on Mr. Nick Nagley. I think I got that right.
You
Um,
did first try.
yes, Nick
Doesn't happen
Nagley
very often.
of Whiskey Acres in DeKalb, Illinois. This is an extra special episode just because Nick and I have been, as we were just talking about before, hit the record button. We've been chatting for almost 2 years now, something like that. Introduced by our mutual good friend, Eric, the cowboy. And what can I say? I've been interested in talking. We've had things on both of our sides to reschedule, and I thought that would be an interesting way to start. Actually, before we even get into Whiskey Acres specifically, was to ask. I think the last time we had to move something, it was because you were called up to the Capitol or to the state, to the legislature, to consult on something, or some bill was going to get passed. What was that about?
Well, so I was going to try to do this call without having a drink, and that first question may break my sobriety for the evening. But so one of the things that I do, on behalf of the distillery and on behalf of distilleries in the state of Illinois at large, is I'm on the board of directors for the Illinois Distillers Association. And just like every other state's laws, most of what we're dealing with on the books is laws that were written in the 30s when Al Capone was alive and Prohibition was fresh. And unfortunately, many of those laws are lacking of common sense and prohibiting our growth and growth opportunities. And so somehow I have been appointed the person in the state that gets to go down to the Capitol and have these conversations to try to be the change agent. Unfortunately, due to policies and politics outside of my control, I was unsuccessful in this attempt. We actually did come to some terms with our opposition. So in terms of getting people on board who are supposed to be on board, we were successful. It truly was just a matter of the Senate and the state was unwilling to bring up alcohol bills. So there's so many battles to fight in this, and it's among the most emotional roller coasters I've ever been a part of. And thank anybody, any distillers who are listening to this, thank anybody who's dedicating time to this process because it is the most thankless and exhausting project you can be involved in. And I cannot wait to celebrate a victory in the coming months or years.
Fair enough. And you guys have been around. We'll get into the intro here. Whiskey Acres has been distilling for and producing for a decade at this point,
I
almost.
just I just stared at a barrel that's 10 and a half years old,
Right.
made by
Um,
us.
it was December 14, right?
December of 14, yes.
December 14. So there's been a lot of changes that have happened in Illinois. Recently we spoke to Paul over at Few. So clearly we've made progress. You've made progress there, but there's more to be made. So with that, we'll put a pin in that context for the moment and jump back to Whiskey Acres. So this is a 2,000 acre farm in DeKalb, Illinois. It's about 60 miles west of Chicago, founded with, however you want to put it, with Jamie Walter, fifth generation farmer. And the way that he put it, he wanted to add value to the grain and be vertically integrated and also be a farm to table competitor to Garrett's popcorn, which apparently is a big thing in the Midwest. And I uh, was not aware of it. So, with that as the starting point, embellish it for us. What's the origin
Sure.
story for Whiskey Acres?
So one at least important character of the team that you're missing is Jamie's dad, Jim.
Mm.
So Jamie and his father have their family has been running this farm here in DeKalb since the 1930s, and the previous generation was farming in Portsmouth, Ohio, in the 1800s. My family has a separate farm about 100 miles straight south of Chicago that we've been operating since the 1860s. Um, my family's farm's smaller. It's one of those that my dad still runs it. He needs help, but just doesn't need a partner right now. And so I kind of got bird kicked out of the nest and found some other things to do. And so really what happened is I was personally working in the seed business. And in short, Jamie and Jim were customers of mine, and I got to know them, socially and professionally. And they had sort of conceived the idea, yeah, kind of if you go back to the Garrett's popcorn concept, Jamie is always looking for a way to vertically integrate the farm to sort of take some of the risk away from commodity farming. And so one of the things that they had done is they had a seed business on the farm. They also had a commercial crop insurance business. Sort of related to the farm, Jamie and his wife actually were doing some custom winemaking and blending out of Napa Valley and making some really nice cabs. But what happened there is that was going on in 2008, 2009, and their broker, if I remember this right, whoever was getting the whiskey or the wine across the lines went out of business and still had possession of his product, and used every ounce of lawyering he has. And I don't know if you knew this now, but he's refers to himself as a recovering attorney. But to navigate multiple state laws to get product that was his that he didn't actually have possession of back to the state of Illinois to get it moved. Anyway, sort of made the statement, I'm never going to be part of a process or a business where I lose control like that. So looked into Garrett's Popcorn, the competitive side to Garrett's Popcorn, tells the story, was researching varieties of popcorn, concurrently sipping a bourbon, looked out his back door and saw his corn and had the light bulb moment of maybe we should be looking at bourbon instead of popcorn. And I think maybe it just so happened that I walked into their office the next day with an idea about another career trajectory that I would potentially have, and he sort of interrupted and intercepted that and said, "Hey, I've got this idea. Would you consider being my partner and moving forward on this?" So, in short, I went home and had a very different conversation with my wife about, maybe we're not going to do this, but let's try this. And, 12 or 13 years later, here we are. And there's three of us who are founding partners here. Jamie's sort of go to market and reason behind this is on the business side of adding value to the farm and making things so that they're sustainable and economically viable and a place to pass on to the next generation a financially feasible farming operation. Obviously I would vote for that as well and have that same vision. For me personally, creating Whiskey Acres was more about creating a place and a product to be able to have a conversation with the general consumer about what we as farmers do on a day-to-day basis. One of my previous jobs, kind of fresh out of college, was I traveled essentially the country teaching the farm to table process in agriculture. And the gap that exists in the world of what people think we do on a farm versus what we do on a farm is bigger than you could ever imagine. And so, I look at this place as a way to bridge that gap and have a candid conversation to showcase what we do and have it over a drink.
Love it. I mean, doing the research for this episode, uh, admittedly over a little bit longer time than I usually have to do the research. I was struck by the fact that a lot of the interviews and podcasts and episodes and such that you or Jamie or another member of the team have been on were farming podcasts, which you might be thinking if you're listening, oh, they have farming podcasts. Yes, they do. But they were talking about, like you said, the idea of, okay, we're not just going to make bourbon. We're also going to make rye and single malt. That's later on, but we're going to make bourbon. We've got this corn. We've got varieties of corn. And we want to explore that and have a conversation, like you said. So I don't know if this is the right podcast to go into the split there between what you've got between farmers and the consumer. I think that's a mini series, at least in itself.
Yes.
But so before I forget, I do want to just give props to Jamie for the fact that he got possession of that, because possession is 9/10 of the law.
That's right.
So he got that 10% off. So good on him. Early on, so you're having this conversation. It's about 12 years ago, 2012, 2013. Early on, as you're building out this idea, nothing's even been built yet, you get connected with Dave Pickerel. So I know I've seen that you got connected. Don't think I've heard how you got connected with him.
Pure persistence. That's kind of the best way to describe it. So, back then we read the books and we went to the classes, and I think Jamie went to a class up at Parallel 45 with, I think it's Paul Werney, if I remember right.
Mhm.
And I did a class with Koval And we came back and shared notes, and you know in some cases the the launch advice from them was identical. In some cases, they couldn't have been more polarizing opposite. And I don't remember who it was, but somebody had mentioned to Jamie, Dave's name, and that he was um, involved and wanting to be involved in unique distilleries. And I think it was 4 to 5 months, and I'm not exaggerating, of phone calls, emails, and text messages of trying to get Dave, convinced, because back in 2011, 2012, 2013, whatever that time frame was, the craft distilling movement was booming, and so there was no shortage of people like us in terms of those wanting to get into the business. But I think there was maybe a shortage of people with maybe as compelling of a story as we had. And so once we finally got to and through to Dave, we had the privilege of paying him and paying for him to fly out here to interview us. And I remember 15 to 20 minutes into the interview, we were telling him our story, our passion, and our vision. He stopped us and said, "Guys, I'm going to work with you." He says, "What you guys are selling me on and sharing with me is what I've been trying to get Maker's Mark to do for the last 20 years." And he said, "This is not just guys with money, which I don't have, didn't have, wanting to open a distillery. This is guys with a passion that truly want to bring something revolutionary in terms of a product and a process to the distilling world." And that's how we got Dave, was just our authenticity, our transparency, and our willingness to lean into the farm as opposed to lead with whiskey, so to speak.
And call it apocryphal, but there is an apocryphal story that I heard only once, that was he had a condition: he wouldn't take you on if he found out that you had been distilling illegally before he joined you.
That's true. I mean, at least that's what he tells people anyway. I can
Right.
I can tell you that uh, our team had never distilled a drop of whiskey before we had our first legal distillation on December 21st of 2014 with Dave on hand.
So, in addition to Dave, you also you just said this, but also from an interview on Bourbon Bites back in 21, you said you read books, both took classes, learned not only about that large gap between the farmer and the consumer, but also a large gap between what you needed to know as distillers and what you had at that time. Obviously, you had Dave on hand for the build out for the first run, but if it went kind of how he went with other distilleries, like he would get you to that point and then kick the bird out of the nest, to use what the phrasing you used earlier. What were some of those things that you learned that maybe either Dave couldn't teach or you had to learn elsewhere?
Patience. I'd say that's the number one word that applies to everything related to distilling, is patience. Um, you know, whether it's distilling or anything, somebody can tell you what to do, and you can read a book and think you've got it all figured out till you do it. And once you do it, the your eyes are opened in ways that you never understood before. And um, you know, there there are ways. And I remembering on day one, night number one, when the still was handed over to me to make our first batch. Um, we have a 500-gallon pot still with an 8-plate column that it was built in a way that a batch should take 6 to 8 hours, and if we wanted to run a double shift, we could run two in a day. And on that first batch, I think I was here by myself going into hour number 14 or 15 or something like that. And what in the world is happening here? And so it's, try this, and what I remember is there's a steam trap on the bottom of the still, and I turned that valve, and steam and water blew about 80 feet across the shop. And um, then the still took off, and I lost control of the distillation. And so at that point it was probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So wrap things up, take a couple 3-hour nap, and meet Dave back here at 6 or 7 to walk through what we did. And learned that there was a malfunctioning steam trap, and so there's probably dozens, if not hundreds, of stories like that of things are supposed to work this way and they don't, and by being there and having an understanding of what works and what doesn't and how to fix it, you learn along the way. And that was one of our policies here is we were unwilling to hire anybody to do it until we knew how to do it ourselves. And because of that, we spent 2 years running the place. And I did most of the distillation, but Jim and Jamie would hop in. But the idea was once we brought somebody on board, that if they had an issue, I could close my eyes, walk them through the distillery and say, have you turned this valve? Have you done this? Have you tried that? To make sure that we could make it happen.
Sense. The I was going to ask this question later, but I think it's timely to ask it now. You mentioned, besides Dave, of course, you mentioned Koval, uh, parallel 45, 45th parallel. Were there, you and Jamie have both spoken about how distilleries that were open around that time, both ones that have been open for a while and ones that had, just like you, were at the beginning of that second wave. Were there other distilleries you want to kind of call out that helped you along the way
Yes.
in the beginning?
Couple specifically. One was Blom Brothers up in Galena. We reached out to them and had questions, and their answer was come see us. And so we spent a day with them. Matt and Mike have since become great friends, but you name the question that we had, they did their best to answer it. So I've done it before, and I'll say it again. Thank you, Matt and Mike at Blom Brothers. Another was Tremaine at CH Distilling in Chicago, now the proud owner of Malort. But Tremaine similarly, invited us in, and subsequently we ended up using his mechanical contractor to build out everything in the distillery. Again, Tremaine has continued to be a great friend. And then maybe the other fun was maybe not somebody who helped us looking back and giving us guidance, but Mike Swanson at Far North, also a farmer distiller, more focused on rye, but he was in the middle of his build out around the same time that we were. And so there were endless phone calls back and forth of, what the hell do we get ourselves into? How do we do this? And I say this, with love and respect, but working with Dave was great when you got him. But it was very challenging sometimes to get him because he was such an in-demand person. And so there were times where, we'd need whatever, and we're having a panic attack, and so it was, hey, let's call Mike and see if he's figured this one out yet. And as a result, Mike has become a great friend in the industry as well.
And so I also had this as a later question, but Mike, I'm still going to ask the question later, but Mike at Far North, I hadn't heard of Far North, or maybe I had, but I hadn't been familiar with them until fairly recently, thanks to Lost Lantern. They did a barrel of their rye. I think they did a barrel of their bourbon too, but definitely the rye. And I loved it. There are a couple of products that I just try the first time, and immediately I want to know more about the distillery. And those are some of my highest rated and just my favorite whiskeys that I've ever had. So his was definitely one of those. With Whiskey Acres, I think I ended up just looking at what I have on my shelf.
I'm on the opposite side of our office, but I can see the 3 or 4 Lost Lantern bottles over there. So I see the bottles, but I can't see what's on the label, and I don't remember exactly what we sent to them.
No, it's fine. I think I had from you. I think I ended up having the 7-year-old straight bourbon
From Lost Lantern.
No, just from you, from straight up
okay.
from Whiskey Acres.
Okay.
I think I had that first. I don't know if I've had a Whiskey Acres from Los Angeles. I must have at this point.
We were part of that same Farmers Field project that, well,
Right.
Maybe you got an earlier iteration, but Lost Lantern just did a Farmers Field project with Far North, Whiskey Acres, Corbin and Cash, and
Frey Ranch.
Frey Ranch.
Right. Yeah. So I must have had, because I got the Somerset from them. So yeah, I must have had that recently. Honestly, like, things are just a blur at this point. But I know the first one that I tried was the 7-year-old from you when I came out, and I had been holding off on trying the samples that you generously sent me because I wanted to do them closer to the podcast. And then, as we said earlier, things just kind of got out of control. So I ended up trying the seven first. And it was the same kind of thing. I loved it and immediately wanted to try out more from the distillery to see what else are you putting out. Um, and I appreciate what you're saying about Dave. He was such an in-demand person. I unfortunately never got to meet him or even talk to him. I started all this like a year and a half after he passed. So I knew his name when he passed, but not probably because I heard it on Whiskey Cast or something like that, or Urban Pursuit at the time. So we'll come back to Mike later on as well. With Jamie, uh, and you, it sounds like, you were both still, well, Jamie was definitely still farming like on a day-to-day basis when Whiskey Acres was started. Um, you, it sounds like you could have been farming, like your family has the farm, but as you said, your dad wasn't ready to take on the partner right
I'm
now.
I'm there for strategic help
Right.
and get there seasonally and but it's not a good paying gig, but it's
Right.
in my blood and a passion and something I'm very involved in.
Right. So, you're both still farmers, still are farmers, but still were farmers when Whiskey Acre started. So I was curious when you first started and first fired the stills in late 2014. Jamie did an interview. It was on one of the farming podcasts I listened to, and he was saying that he basically it made it sound like you had to wait to fire the stills until he was out of the fields. You know, I don't know if that was the case. It might have just been like that was when the stills were ready to be fired. And you had all the equipment. Um, but going back to what you said about, or the first 2 years, like you did most of the more of the distilling as opposed to him. Um, did I guess in terms of time allocations, did you spend more time hands on like that? And Jamie was more the, I guess, strategic partner or some other
Yep.
type of partner in the meantime?
And I would say that's how it is. We often laugh that Jamie thinks about and deals with stuff that needs to be done, 3 to 5 years down the road, and I deal with stuff that should have been done yesterday. It's kind of
Gotcha.
kind of how it gets balanced out, and so he is the more visionary and strategic thinker, and I am the operations and execution.
Gotcha. So one of the other things that Dave did initially for you was just to help you get products on the shelves and able to boost you faster was initially he had you aging in smaller barrels in 15s, 25s, with a couple of 53s in there. By year three, you were filling mostly, if not all, 53s and shooting for a 5 year base. Now we're 8-ish years, 7, 8 years past that point where you would have gone to all 53s. Were you able to transition pretty smoothly?
Yeah. On year one, we filled 15s, 25s, 53s. Year two was 25s and 53s, and year three and beyond is only 53s, with a couple exceptions of, we've done a couple 25s just to learn a little bit more about some one-off projects a little quicker but um, today our lineup is we've got a minimum age statement straight bourbon of 4. We've got a bonded bourbon that's 5.5 or 6. And we've got a 7-year bourbon that has 7 and 8 year barrels in it. And so, we put the plan together and executed the plan. You asked, did we have a smooth transition? No, we didn't. And the reason for that is, our big launch for our bonded products was late Q1 and big time Q2 of 2020.
Mhm.
Remember that? Remember those days?
Yeah.
And so like late March and April, we had the better part of 50 or 60 or 70, some immeasurable amount of events canceled due to COVID. And so, we came off of our first bonded products, both won double gold at San Francisco. And, we're stuck behind a laptop trying to talk about it as opposed to being at events and showcasing and cheering those things. So our challenge of transition wasn't because of bad planning, unless you call not planning for a global pandemic bad planning. So,
Yeah, I don't think that one could be laid at your feet. So uh, I was going to ask if there was anything left of the smaller barrels. You said you had one that was 10 and a half years old. That must be,
no, it's 53. Yeah.
it is a
Yeah.
53. Okay.
Yeah. There are no 53 or 15s, I should say. Um, and if there's a 25, it's a true orphan. But basically the answer is no.
Right. I mean, you said that you might have some 25s for a one-off project, see if something works. And when you're, I like that because if you're working with these different corn varietals, we'll get into that too. You you can definitely use a smaller barrel in that case to at least see, how the spirit's going to age. And if you've been doing this long enough, which you guys have, you can tease out what's the barrel, what's the spirit,
Right.
and see if this is going to work in a 53.
You know,
Um,
the transition out of small barrels is absolutely essential for just the bottom line of the business. You know, the cost per gallon of a small barrel versus a 53 gallon is, a factor of two or three, depending on where you're buying them from. So that in itself. But the thing that we never considered, and we're thankful that we had a transition plan, was, smaller barrels have more surface area, so you get more liquid to oak contact. But concurrently, that surface area leads to more angel share. So it was very common to empty a 25-gallon 3-year barrel that's got 30% loss on it. 35, 40, that's expensive whiskey right there.
that's extreme.
Yeah,
That's, I mean, annualized 10%, 10, 15%, because you're going to lose what, like 5 days, 5 to 7% the day you enter the barrel, just soaking into the wood, and then a 10% yearly after that. That's unsustainable. That's Texas level.
that's bye small barrels. Thank you,
Exactly.
Dave, for helping us put this plan together.
Yeah. Um, and so this will sound like a jilted transition, but it does make sense, which is, um, I loved what you and Jamie both expressed. One of you did it on Cigar Social Podcast in 22, and the other one did it on Bourbon Matters in 23, which was this idea that for anyone who's tasted the youngest of your stock, so stuff that was put down in 14, 15, 16, thank you for the early support, but please come back 6 years later, at that point, 7 years later, and try what we're doing now. Because a couple of years in craft distilling is a lifetime.
Yep.
And I liked it because it was a great call to action. Number one, it incentivizes people to come in and see, okay, if we liked it back then, chances are you're probably going to like it even better now. But also, it acknowledges the changes that have taken place. So, if you were talking to someone who came in and had come into Whiskey Acres in 16, 17, let's even say pre COVID as a wide range, and they came back in 23, 24, 25, and they're trying ostensibly what is the same product. They're saying, give me your bourbon. What is this like? How would you describe to them what the profile was and what it is now?
Well, I without using what I would call like tasting notes, I'd rather qualify it with um, the way we have changed. And so what I mean by that, the way we have changed in addition to just what sort of organically happens by getting older. So the first thing that I'll say, and maybe among the most important things, is, I said that I primarily did most of our distilling for the first couple of years. After that, we hired a guy named Rob Wallace, who has came to us with a passion for whiskey, common sense, work ethic, all of those things, but similar to us, never made a drop before in his life. I spent, 2 months attached to the hip with him, teaching him processes and procedures, and then, stepped away to kind of deal with attempting to sell product. And at the time, Dave was still alive. And so, it was Rob would say, hey, why are we doing this? Or why aren't we doing that? And, be perfectly honest with you, the answer was because that's what Dave told us to do in many, many cases. And, so then, hey, Dave, why are we doing it this way? And in many cases, it was because in teaching us how to make whiskey, he wanted to make it as simple as possible, so that, you don't open, you don't write your graduate thesis on day one, right?
Mhm.
And so he taught us, the 100, 200, and 300 level coursework of distilling. Um, but there was room for improvement. And so Rob came on board and would ask these questions, and we'd huddle up with Dave and get answers. And in some cases, it was because this is the way and there's no other way. In other cases, it was because, you know, you had an option and this is what we chose, or it was because he didn't think we were smart enough to do it a different way at the time. All valid reasons. Um, then Dave passed away. And so we lost our resource there. And to Rob's credit, and I don't know if this was coincidental or not, but in that same time frame, Rob enrolled himself at Heriot-Watt University out of Edinburgh, Scotland, where he earned his master's in distillation and fermentation sciences and wrote his master's thesis on how varieties of corn affect the flavor of whiskey. So we went from, three farmers with an idea, with generations of skill and success on the farming side of thing, but with, a couple years of distillation experience to, several years of distillation experience and a person who, could execute the mechanics of it, but had a firm understanding of the science behind it. And so that in itself, I think, is one of the biggest selling points of why what we have in a bottle today is not the same as what we had in the bottle in 2018. So, we've got a a person and a team together who has experience and education to help drive that change. Um, Secondarily to that is, you know, in 2018, if we did hey, we're gonna release 200 cases, well, that probably meant that we had 5 or 6 barrels that were of age to release. Today, if we're going to release 200 cases, we have 70 or 80 barrels that we can curate to put together a blend to meet a profile that we want. So we never tried to rush anything. We never put anything in a bottle that we thought was something we needed to apologize for. But it was important from a marketing standpoint to help to get liquid to lips, to give people, the opportunity to taste and talk to us and with us and about us, and create some cash flow to keep the operation going. One thing that we haven't talked about is the pride that we have in the fact that we never sourced anything. So by not sourcing, um, you know, we have a conversational advantage, but a cash flow disadvantage. And so I still stand by that we made the right decision. That our seed to spirit model of truly being, seed to spirit of not relying on anybody else or anybody else's liquid has been essential to us and for us. And as I see maybe the industry with some struggles right now, particularly in those source labels, I'm even more confident that we made the right decision to do it this way.
So you answered one question that I had additionally, which was when Rob came on, where was he in that master thesis idea? So uh, the did the idea for his thesis come from working with you guys, or did he come in with that idea and then was able to execute once he joined?
I don't know that answer. He was with us for the better part of the year before that conversation happened. So
Okay.
whether that had been baking in the back of his mind since he was in his college days, I don't know. But whether he thought about it and told us the next day, or he had been stewing on it and waited a year to bring it up. But either way, kudos to him for that uh, drive to make himself and us better. And I'm proud that we made the investment in him to do it.
Sure. And so adjunct to, or adjunct, adjacent, adjacent, that's what I was looking for, to the concept of not sourcing is that there's a pledge from the beginning to only distill what you could grow. Now, it's a great statement to put out, and it's not, a noble one to say. Obviously, harder in practice. Even with you've got the 2,000 acres on hand, you've got knowledgeable farmers there. Doesn't mean everything's going to grow. And from what I heard, you did have, some challenges initially with barley. for example, doesn't grow great where you are. Corn grows fantastically. Rye was growing, but it was more a cover crop and non varietal specific NVS as well. So I feel like you kind of answered the question of were you tempted to branch out for new yields or flavors by either using other grains from other people. I feel like the answer would be no there, but
No.
yeah.
Yes.
Uh,
Correct.
but so I'll twist it a little bit to say, have you have so many corn varieties that you work with, and we'll get into them. Just for example, green Oaxacan, glass gem, the yellow dent varieties, blue popcorn, bloody butcher, a cross corn, a flint corn from Tuscany. You must have had some that you tried that just didn't work, um, for whatever reason. That could be for corn, that could be for the other grains as well. So, how much have you been able to play around with these varieties, and what would you say is like the success rate, if you will, of ones that you were able to push forward into something that became to be?
Well, I'll say this on the rye side of things is we work with Mike up at Far North, found one that's agronomically sound to grow here. It works. We got the parent seed, so we're able to grow our seed year after year. And we don't mess with that. It works, done. Wheat, we have utilized the same variety for the last 10 years. This last fall and subsequently this summer harvest, we transitioned to a new variety that has absolutely been fantastic from a yield and grain quality standpoint. We're done experimenting on. I mean, it wasn't an experiment as much as 10 years is a long time to be utilizing a same genetics, and so it was just a great step for us. Um, Barley is quite candidly the biggest challenge that we have. We've learned that we have to overmanage that, and you know, for full transparency, and we've said this before, barley was the one sort of asterisk that we've ever had on in our commitment to growing everything. But we have subsequently grown it and been successful at it. But barley, again, for full transparency, we utilize supplemental enzymes. So we grow it. The biggest challenge is finding a way and a person to malt it. There's been a couple maltsters that we've worked with somewhat locally who have then changed to gluten free or just challenge that we have. That our cost to have a pound of barley malted is more than it is to buy a pound of malted barley from a supplier. Does that make sense?
It does, but it doesn't. But yeah, I get what
Yes,
you
but
mean.
you under okay. Um, and so we figured all that out. But our biggest and singular experimentation and adaptation comes from our focus on corn. Like you said, we can grow the best corn in the planet here. Um, there's one advantage of having this commercial farm is that the information that we need to glean to run a successful grain farm sometimes works hand in hand with what we need to do to run a successful, distilling operation in terms of identifying genetics that make superior corn. All that being said, one of the biggest transitions that we've had over the last nearly 11 years is, we have our foundational yellow dent varieties of corn. We have fooled around with a lot, on an annual basis. So we limit ourselves to two or three because it's easy to grow it. It's easy, quote unquote, to grow it. But then, once you've got it, you got to figure out what to do with it. And so you've got storage issues and drying issues. And, do you have enough or too much to make it functional in the production schedule? So, again, all that being said, we've had a couple duds. Probably the biggest, most disappointing dud that we've had is it's just such an incredible story. Years ago, I mean, probably 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I read an article talking with somebody from Monticello, the Monticello estate, and they had been doing this program to bring back plants of the time. And one of them was this white corn variety called Cox Prolific. General Cox served underneath Thomas Jefferson, and he was a farmer on the East Coast. And prolific is actually a type of corn that instead of there being a single ear on a single stalk, what happens is you plant a seed and then lots of little like shooters come out of the bottom, and you get a bunch of ears on a single stalk. Um, and it was a widely used corn variety in the 17 and 1800s. Um, and used kind of on the East Coast, but essentially thought to have gone extinct like in World War II era, because modern, plant breeding in the 1930s essentially made anything like that, a loss leader for commercial corn farming unless you wanted something ornamental.
Mhm.
Um, so cool story, tons of history. Monticello worked hard. Essentially, they found some old codger down the road from there who had been growing it in his garden for whatever reason, and they got some seed back, and there was an article about it. I reached out to them and told them who I was and what we wanted to do, and somehow talked them into getting a seed. They sent us seed, and we planted it here. And what we quickly found out was that corn genetics developed in the 1700s uh, on the East Coast don't exactly align with 2017, 2018 growing seasons in Northern Illinois. We have so much plant disease, foliar disease, and just a very, very different climate. Um, so we harvested it. We cleaned the seed harder than anything we've ever done, and so basically that means we're separating out any cracked kernels, any sort of off types, so that the actual corn we're using is as pure as possible. And I don't remember. Maybe we made a barrel. Maybe we made two barrels, and something like that. I think could have been an absolutely fun product to bring to scale, but Mother Nature and agronomics told us that that's not an option.
I was reminded of two different stories, both with very different outcomes. That parallel. One being the story of Jimmy Red Corn down in Charleston with Highwire Distilling, the previous guest on the podcast, and how they were down to two cobs or something of that, and we were able to bring it back. Obviously, that worked out. Um, then I was just speaking with the guys over at Holyrood Distillery in England, and they're using Chevalier barley. So it's the variety that was popular in the 1850s and 60s up to the 1920s. Not great on yield, not a lot of flavor, but it gives this amazing texture. So they use it, and it's made their whiskeys, in my mind, incredible mouthfeels for and textures for very low proof, and it just carries the flavor beautifully. So I like the ideas of these, single, in some cases, single bags of seeds or one or two cobs left. At least you tried it out.
Yep.
Didn't
Uh,
work, but at least you tried it.
you briefly mentioned, and I think this is one of the coolest things we're doing. So I'll double back to it. Is we probably our current most popular product is our blue popcorn. I remember, a fun story of that is it was April 1st of 2015. And I was on the phone with Dave. Again, Dave Pickerel was one of those. I, I was either talking to him about something I'd screwed up and how to fix it, or something I'd done right and how to repeat it. But a friend of mine who farms over in Western Illinois, and he grows commercially viable gourmet popcorn, and he's in my phone as Popcorn Andy, and so Popcorn Andy calls me while I'm on the phone with Dave, and so I had that sort of light bulb moment of, hey Dave, how do you make bourbon from popcorn? And he just gave me the Dave Pickerel chuckle and said, I don't really know. I don't believe it's ever been done before. So I wrapped up my call with Dave. I called Popcorn Andy to see if I could get some seed from him. He hemmed and hawed around because I wasn't clear to him that I was not going to be a popcorn competitor, that we wanted this for uh, you know, use in the distillery. And it just so happened he had some extra seed that season. So mid to late April, we planted it. Then that fall, we harvested enough to make a barrel. And so We made a barrel that year. And what we do, we've got lots of check boxes of number one, can we get the seed? Can we grow it? Uh, does it survive the growing season to be a harvestable, clean grain product? Can it dry down? Because like if we get the wrong variety of popcorn, um, and Mother Nature can't dry it, we can't take popcorn and put it through a commercial grain dryer because then we'll have popcorn, like we'll
Right.
pop it.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
uh, that's something I never want to experience. So if we can check those boxes, then then we bring it in and mill it. How does it mill? Um, Assuming we can do that, then how does it cook? What temperature do you cook popcorn at? How long does it need to rest? What other, how many, does it need a similar amount of enzymes or more or less or whatever? So, we figure all those things out, then we ferment it. What yeast strain do you use? Lots of things like that. Assuming we're successful at that, then we distill it out. Uh, does that work? In the case of popcorn, yes, it did. So we check all those boxes. Then let's put it in a barrel. How does it age? If we check that box, can we sell it? So there's so many steps that go into this process, many of which start before, um, you know, we even take a step into the distillery. So, our sort of go to market is what I think is longer than most. But the longest one that we have is what we call our hybrid corn. So you had mentioned the Tuscany corn.
Mhm.
And you'd also mentioned bloody. I think you mentioned Bloody Butcher.
Mhm.
So we make Bloody Butcher. And I'm damn proud of that product. It's really good. But we're not going to make it anymore. And there's two reasons for it. One is agronomically. It's a pain to grow because it grows so tall. It'll grow 14, 15 feet tall,
Wow.
and it becomes you get an August or a September wind, and it falls over, and it's just a pain in the ass to harvest. So, we can we can manage through it. We could make it work. But the secondary thing is, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, there were three or four of us making Bloody Butcher bourbon, and even though it's not very crowded, it's still more crowded than we'd like to see it today. And so when we're looking for, how do we grow our market, it's not what's everybody else doing, it's what can we do that everybody else can't. And so that's taken us to breeding our own proprietary corn variety. And so you mentioned the Tuscan corn. So we're going back to 100-plus-year-old genetics that are part of the public domain that have no patents on them. And we found an open pollinated yellow flint corn from Minnesota that was used during Prohibition for making moonshine. Um, Agronomically, it's a good corn. It will stand. It's a good mother, I guess I should say, and it makes good whiskey, and it dries well. It's a northern adapted hybrid, so that or a variety, I should say, so that when we grow it here, it will mostly, if not entirely, dry down in the field without any commercial air or commercial heat to dry it down. Um, Jamie subsequently found an open pollinated red flint corn that I think he said there were 2 pounds available in the world and got it from Tuscany, Italy. That one is a bad parent. It makes wonderful grain, great flavor, but it's a sloppy corn in the field. So I said we got 2 pounds of it. So in terms of the process here, so hours, if not days of shopping, hours of days of not planning, then year one, it's as simple as we have 2 pounds of seed and we plant that just to get enough seed that so the next year we can do it to scale. So year one is just growing parent seed. Year two is growing a seed field. So we plant 4 rows of this yellow corn next to 2 rows of this flint corn. We detassel the 4 rows. They cross pollinate, and we get a first generation hybrid. So that's year two. We hand pick all those ears, let them air dry, sort of the old fashioned way with fans in a metal crate. Then use an old fashioned hand crank to get the kernels off. So now year three, we actually have seed for this hybrid that we grow, and then that fall we harvest it to be able to actually make whiskey from it. So it's 3 years of farting around in a field before we can actually bring that feedstock into the distillery to make a distillate. Um, it's a long way of saying our again, we lean into the farm, and I think the first thing I said was patience when we started this conversation.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
you had to learn that
yeah,
that Dave couldn't teach.
they couldn't teach is, we've all, we think that that sort of investment in time and process is what is going to continue to make us a different uh, processor in this distilling world.
So I had a question that I was going to ask next on this, but I want to jump in with a different one, which is you already mentioned the word transparency a bunch, and clearly you guys are very transparent. To me, certainly, it seems that you are. Um, I don't remember again which it was, whether it was you or Jamie who said the only thing you're not transparent about is the special genetics you found that you think make your corn a precursor to superior whiskey. Um, do you? And you're certainly giving bits and pieces of that. You know, we know what the strains are, and so, but it seems like it's really the heart of the word nitty gritty of what isn't necessarily being shared. Do you envision that as kind of a permanent lid, as something that separates you, or do you envision sharing that data at some point down the line?
Well, you know, we're we as an organization are actually part of something called the Estate Whiskey Alliance. It's a program put on by the University of Kentucky that basically, like-minded folks like us who are, um, you know, true and transparent farmer distillers. I'll be fully upfront with you as my sort of out of the distillery time is dedicated to Illinois-based politics, and I don't have a ton of involvement in the EWA. Jamie and Rob are kind of our active members of that. So my answer to your question is I suspect that the cohort of EWA members um, will probably begin to share things in ways that we haven't in the past. Is my best guess of an answer for you. Um, but I still do think that I mean, for instance, this hybrid that we've developed here is essentially it's patent pending. Like we're working on making sure that that is something that we have control over, and like maybe like that, for instance, once we have control, we'll be more transparent about saying words related to the actual genetics as opposed to geographies related to the genetics. And maybe that's overthinking it, but we have, in this wonderful sort of distilling world, I mentioned the Bloms and the parallel 45s and, Mike Swanson and Tremaine and all those folks who have been nothing but forthcoming and welcoming and helpful. We've had a few less savory instances of, we overshared and, not far down the road, we found that people who were very quiet about wanting to open a distillery all of a sudden are doing something very similar to what we're doing.
Mm.
And, you know, had they been transparent about that, we would have overshared and over delivered on anything they wanted to know. And so pretty much, again, we're an open book with just a couple foundational things that we think are important to differentiate us.
Like I got no problem with that. I like the transparency. Understand you got a boundary of intellectual property. Can't argue against that. Um, I do want to ask you about the Estate Whiskey Alliance and what it means to be an estate distillery. Before that, I have a question for you that is coming completely from ignorance on my part of agronomics and farming. So on another of the farming podcasts, Jamie talked about having like a 5-ish year lifespan for varieties. This was speaking particularly about corn. In that by the time the bourbon final whiskey product gets to consumers, the strain may no longer be in use. So you mentioned this in a way when you said you target the parental lineage and the heirloom ones instead, rather than what's perhaps in the field at that moment. Um, Again, coming from ignorance of farming practices and that, can you elaborate on what that timeline might mean and why you need to do that?
Yeah, so endlessly, commercial seed providers are physically breeding new seed genetics. And concurrently, there's computers that have mapped the genotypes of the corn plant and have an understanding of all the lineage that's going on there. And so, in short, what the reason as a commercial grain farmer that you would plant something different 5 years from now than what you would today is the genetic advancement that happens because of the ability for companies to package a better set of genetics for you. And so because of that, seed companies want to sell you, the farmer, something that's going to grow you the most bushels. So unless all the companies are continuing to make these genetic advancements, um, and if you're a company who's not, uh, you're not going to be in business for very much longer. So turning these genetics over is, if you look at sort of the historical yields of the average of bushels per acre of corn, essentially, it's vertical, right? It goes up, and that's one of the pieces of that puzzle is genetic advancement.
Okay. So for, I guess I pretty sure I understand that from the perspective of, let's say, like you said, more commercial, more scaled practices. Let's say when you're dealing with a grain or varietal, rather, like a Oaxacan green or glass gem blue popcorn, even where, or the hybrid that you're creating, where it's very much I, I'm struggling to find the right word because I don't think I know the right word, but a very specific strain,
Specialty corn.
a specialty corn. So when you're looking at, let's just take green Oaxacan as an example of many that we could choose. You plant green Oaxacan in 2025. In 2030, are you, as the same farmer, same distiller, same fields, then do you have to kind of reset your seed stock at that point? Are you using grains that would just come down the line?
So it depends on so Oaxacan, for instance, that's something we buy from a seed supplier. What Nobody is commercially growing Oaxacan corn to have a viable grain farm, a commercially viable grain farm. So that's sort of a different category. Oaxacan green corn, think of it as ornamental. There's no genetic advancement in those. It is what it is. It's an heirloom variety of corn that essentially what I would plant today is the same thing that grandpa could have planted 60 years ago. Um, and so, in some cases, we're buying the same genetics from a seed supplier year in and year out. In the case of our hybrid, we will essentially have to, we'll be able to use that same baseline hybrid seed for a couple of years, and then we'll need to go back and refresh it. Basically, mean we need to rebreed the parent, take the parent seed to create the hybrid again. So I don't know if that it makes perfect sense to me, but
No, that made more sense to me because I was thinking that if you're dealing with a case of a varietal where you are not seeing much advancement or you're intentionally not seeing much advancement, you would have to rebreed them at some point to, like, I use the word reset because it's just the one that came to mind, but to get the purest version of that that you want to, may have gone back.
so it's a very different way for a farmer to think about making seed choices. We're we've talked about sort of our foundational yellow dent corn varieties. Every year, those have represented a much smaller portion of our production, whereas every year, blue popcorn, Oaxaca, and glass gem, our hybrid, goes up. I don't probably 5 or 6 years ago, it was probably 65 or 70% yellow dent corn, 20% rye, and 10% what we call our artisan series with these mess around products. And you could just about take the 70% and the 10% and flip them today. Almost everything we're doing is focused on those differentiating genetics.
And so, last question on the corn just now that just came to mind before I go to the estate distillery, which is, uh, generally, when we're thinking about, is a grain and then a varietal within that grain good for distilling, you're thinking about, is that Does it have more sugar versus or starch versus protein? Is it easily broken down? Um, things like that. So when you and Jamie are thinking about potentially a new variety to use, are you looking at ones that you know already have those properties that you're looking for, perhaps a higher starch, lower protein, or are you more interested in seeing, okay, this one looks really interesting, we don't know what the properties are quite yet, and seeing if it'll work?
We get these really exciting things called seed catalogs that give us, answer a lot of those questions before we have to put it into a field. So we know scientifically what the starch to protein ratio is going to be. Um, we among the more important things from a grain quality standpoint is maturity. We actually really want to find corns that dry as naturally as possible in the field versus needing to go under commercial heat. And the reason I say that is if you're ever on a farm in the fall and they're drying corn, it basically smells like you're at a bakery, and that you're kind of pre-processing the starch, and that's not a step that we want our corn to go through before we distill it. So almost sort of step one is to kind of look at what are the dry down characteristics and what are the maturity characteristics of a particular variety, and will it sync up with our environmental conditions here. Um, then it's like you mentioned, test weight, protein, starch content, and then because of the commercial farm, what we're often doing is we're planting these as just test plots that from the farming standpoint we're looking at how do they yield, but from the distillery standpoint, we'll go out and we'll chew on the kernels. Jamie makes a tea. He'll grind it up and make a tea just to sort of do a preview of the mash to see how it tastes out. Things that there's no real science behind it, but there's just some intuition and a palate that makes those decisions. And at 60 miles an hour going down the highway, to the kind of the untrained eye, it all looks the same. But when you're in a field and understand that every 6 or 8 rows or whatever it is, there's a new set of genetics, and they have something different to offer. There's the science behind it, but also you know we're chewing on cow feed out there to learn more about it.
Thank you everyone for bearing with me through. Honestly, this really was like I just know not enough about farming, which is surprising given the company I keep. Uh, and people listening will know exactly who I'm talking about. Uh, but I just needed to learn more about it. And when you have an example like this where you are using so many corn varieties, it's a good opportunity to jump in there. So with that, we'll step away from the grain for a moment, kind of, to talk about, like I said, I want to talk about this estate whiskey alliance. You mentioned a few that are part of it. You Far North, Frey Ranch, Hill Rock here in New York is another one. It's pretty recent, like just the last couple of years this has been coming around, because Hill Rock made a big deal about it on the social media and such when they joined. So what does it mean to be in this alliance and to be an estate distillery?
So again, I want to caveat this that my I have a very surface level understanding of EWA,
Sure.
and so I cannot and will not dig too deep into it just because that my bandwidth has not encroached into that. But I will say, just broadly speaking, for us, we got Jamie and Rob got very involved, and one of the reasons was to make sure that involvement and membership in the EWA did not degrade what we consider to be the qualifications of being a true estate distillery. Uh, we don't believe that buying corn from your neighbor that you had no involvement in, um, curating the genetics or where it's planted or why it's planted, is the same as being the farmer who put the seed in the ground with intention. You know, local and estate are two very different things. There's nothing wrong with that. We encourage and embrace that concept. But as the guys who are doing it, we're very particular about our willingness to accept people who also say they're doing it, if that makes sense. Um, I think one of the bigger sort of marketing challenges that exists out there, you said you're from New York, you know, I believe the state of New York has a designation for a farm distillery, which you are qualified to be one if you buy grain from a farm in New York. And I think that is a very confusing thing for a consumer to experience. And so, it's fairly well established, in the wine world. If you're in a state vineyard, uh, you kind of have control of those vines that you use to grow your grapes to make your wine. And we think that, similar controls should be in place for distilling. Again, there's no stones thrown or obviously you don't need to be an estate distiller to be a successful distiller. To be a successful distiller, we just think that you need to be authentically involved in production to to claim such, and knowing what we know on the back end of things of how that control affects your feedstock, which subsequently affects your final flavor. We think it's important to make sure that the people who are involved in this are truly doing it.
It's a good intro for me. Uh, Again, I mean, I've had the pleasure of speaking with Frey Ranch before with Colby and Ashley. This was
Great
before
people.
the yeah, wonderful people, great whiskey. I mean, they're the rye, 100% rye is still one of my favorite ryes, just heavy on the
Yeah.
licorice. Um, I do want to speak to Mike up at Far North, and I'm still looking at Hill Rock too, although they've been a little harder to pin down. So, practically speaking, you are the first distillery that I'm speaking to after the EWA has been founded, and you're making a big deal about the fact that you're a state whiskey. So thank you for introing for me. With there's so many more things to go over, but
Yep.
I do want to.
Let me interrupt just for a moment. So
Yeah,
the EWA, as far as I see it, kind of serves as two functions. I think it's a way to legitimize those who are truly doing it, but as importantly, because it's through the University of Kentucky, the dollars that we generate that go back to the EWA will drive research and development to help people like us and other members to be better growers of proprietary genetics. It basically it makes a sort of a club for those who are doing it the way we are to become better at doing what we're doing, and I think that's absolutely important.
absolutely. That's honestly that's kind of where my question earlier about sharing the data came from. Is you have certain centers around the country, around the U.S. Like Harriet Watt is its own thing in Scotland, and they they have what they have here. We've got UC Davis, Oregon State, Michigan State, University of Kentucky, more so now. These centers where you're really studying not only the grain genetics, but you have a purposeful integration of brewing and distilling science into it. So, which just it takes a different tack on agriculture and economics, however you want to put it. And that's I think where the data question comes from. Is I want to see these advancements made and the sharing of knowledge because it is so important. With the caveat that you better have the patent there first, which I
Right.
fully agree with. Uh, so when this episode goes live, there'll be show notes that I'll include some of the more um, mundane, if you will, production side things like you mentioned earlier, the size and shape of the still, some of the mash cookers, and some of those details that I was already able to glean either from the website or from other sources. One I did want to just check in on was you mentioned when you're dealing with different corn strains in particular, you test out which yeast is going to work best with them. And yeast is a frequent theme on this podcast of which one works. So do you find that you're able to use a pretty consistent set of yeasts or rotation of yeasts, or do you really have to go one by one with these varieties?
So, that has changed over the years, but we have, I believe it's three yeasts that are on a rotation now. And, that's not specifically to, sort of our artisan series, but to just like almost everything that we distill, specific to like our straight bourbon today. Rob utilizes actually three different yeast strains uh, for these fermentations. They get barreled separately, and then when we go to make these blends, we have notes of the yeast from those source barrels and utilize those to bring a blend together. That goes back to one of your earlier questions. That's a change, a big change from, 10 years ago, we're making bourbon and we're using this yeast strain, and we're making rye and we're using that yeast strain. Um, so we are constantly looking for improvements. Uh, Rob, I love to tell this. There's been a few times where people come through the distillery and ask where Rob is, and I get to tell them he's at a yeast convention in Canada or something like that. But we actually work very closely with Lallemand uh, because of the control that we have here. They send us stuff that's not to market yet, and we do experiments with their yeast strains to see how they affect things. We send them samples and GC things, and we learn a lot, and they learn a lot. And I suspect, I mean, you know, I'm very good at the 30,000 foot view here. I'm not a yeast expert. If I set Rob down next to you, he could talk about yeast for hours, and some people would find that fun. Uh, you know, I have learned, to kind of pick my lane and know where my time and resources are best spent, and we trust Rob implicitly on making these changes, advancements, and learnings, and don't ask him what he's doing. We ask him to tell us what he's doing, and that's how he's playing with the yeast world.
I would imagine, and obviously I'm putting words in his mouth here, but I would imagine that's quite a nice setup. He's you've got someone who's been with you not since the beginning, but since pretty early on, with a passion already. You add in the scientific learning that he went through, and now he's getting to see the products that you distilled and that he distilled even coming to market as fully fledged. I'm struggling to find a word other than things because I want it to be really wide ranging and just be like whiskeys and different products. Um, so I would imagine that must be really nice and rewarding for him to be able to see it all the way through. Yeah, especially when like
I can speak, as you know, sort of a happy tear moment for me was, uh, you know, the day that whiskey I distilled made it to a bottle and that won an award, and,
yeah,
and Rob gets to live that frequently, and he gets better awards than anything I did, and so he continues to grow in his partnership with us, and is always seems to be learning, and every bottle that we fill, I think is a testament to the work that he's putting into helping us manage, the front end of the resources we've given him.
sure. And I only wanted to delineate that from what you had distilled because as thin a line as it might be at Whiskey Acres, you and Jamie are owners and founders. Rob clearly has a tremendous amount of leeway and can come to you and say, I'm trying this, I'm doing this. At the end of the day, though, as far as I know, he doesn't have an ownership stake.
He has a little bit. He's
Okay, so you got a little bit. So I think just in that mindset of like the founder then versus the distiller came on later, it might be a little bit different, but I understand how you're saying this is still a very proud moment for you to see this person you guys brought on and have held on to for all this time. Also, in the context of people are moving around a lot in the industry these days. The last like decade, people are really moving around 3, 4 years, maybe at a distillery, and that's barely enough time to get a cycle of whiskey out, of good whiskey, honestly. Um, and yes, I'm going to say it here. There are people who have made whiskeys younger than that that are very good. I've tried them. I do like them. You are the exception. If you're listening to this, you're the exception. The rule is not that. So having someone there long term is both impressive and it means something. So we just being conscious of time. When you guys opened to the public, uh, Whiskey Acres rapidly became one of the top tourist destinations in the area. You're basically an hour ish drive from Chicago. You're getting about 2,000 visitors a month as of last year. Jamie has said he didn't anticipate that being a thing. The visitor aspect of it, whether it was through a visitor center or increased physical presence. And it sounded like you had to adapt to the increased foot traffic, even with the dip during COVID, obviously. So another adaptation question: how has Whiskey Acres adapted from that original vision of we're focusing really on the grains and the farm and bringing that farm to spirit into, okay, but we're also going to have an experience here and have people visiting and want to see what we're doing?
Well, you know, I'd say personally, maybe I was less surprised. And, as it, comes back to sort of my reasoning, one of my reasons for getting into this was to, create that experience. Um, and so, that being said, Jamie was right in that the on-site experience has superseded what our original plans were. Um, and so, what has that meant is, we opened up operating out of a 365 square foot tasting room that was built by Jim's brother in the 50s. We utilized it from basically, I got to think, April 1 through December 1 or something like that. It's uninsulated, so very driven by seasonality. So as I think about this, we would essentially shut down revenue generation, but at least we kind of like got our lives back. It's like we didn't have to think about the place being open, on holidays or any of that stuff. But in 2019, we built a 4,000 square foot visitor center. If you'd have come out here in 2017, we had a 360 square foot tasting room with an 8-car gravel parking lot. We've got a 60-car parking lot, a 5-acre overflow parking lot, 4,000 square foot visitor center, a whiskey garden with seating for 200 people on it. Um, you know, we are, and I don't think that people, that everyone comes here because of the whiskey. I think that a lot of people do, but I think a lot of people come here because it makes them feel like they're somewhere else. And I think that's an important experience to give to people. And we've done a very good job of curating that.
I can't agree with that enough. I obviously have not visited yet. I hope to. There are a bunch around the Chicagoland area that I really would like to. This year's Indiana, so see, maybe next year. Um, but I understand that because I'm a Long Islander born and bred. I live in the outskirts of New York City, and when I'm able to visit a distillery like out on Long Island or up in the Hudson Valley, it's an hour or two maybe of a drive, but you do feel like you're somewhere else. You feel like you're out of the hustle and bustle. You have a better connection with nature. You're surrounded by, hell, you're in a garden, you're in a whiskey garden. You know, it's a very different experience. And it also just makes things taste better, I think. Yeah.
It's like wine. Does wine
Yeah.
taste better, in a wine shop, or does it taste better at a vineyard?
I mean,
You
look,
know,
that's why I don't review things on site because everything tastes better at the distillery.
yeah.
Even the most god awful things will taste just a little bit better when the person pouring it for you has either made it or knows it. Yeah. So, got to keep those things separate for sure. But you shouldn't skip that enjoyment. Like I still want to taste it at the distillery. I'm just not going to use that as the basis of my review. With I was thinking about that too, as you mentioned, during the initial shock of COVID, you guys had so many events canceled. And I was thinking, 360 square foot tasting room is going to be real tough to host an event in with an 8-car parking lot. Uh, so while 2019 may not have been the best timing at the moment that it happened, I'm sure, long term, it's turned out much better for you guys to have that space and to be able to host and have people come and be able to try. And if nothing else, it gives people a chance to look around the distillery while they're waiting in those insane lines when you guys have a new release that sells out in 2 hours.
The one big thing that COVID did for us is, we built this new building, um, to get people inside. And then, a year later, we were told people can't come inside. And so
Right.
that forced us to, create what we now call the whiskey garden. And, you come here on a nice afternoon, there's more people outside than inside. And that was us, we should have been smart enough to see that coming and make that investment in the first place. But I think it was also sort of a cultural shift too of people just, you're going to live life. It's got to be outdoors. You know, the whiskey garden was sort of, if you build it, they will come. And they did. And, uh, there's still stickers or remnants of stickers on our floor for the social distancing 6 foot nightmare that we had to attempt to deal with. And, um, just glad we don't have that anymore.
Absolutely. So we just got a couple more minutes here. I want to hit two questions for you in that time. The first one dealing with, I did want to come back to Mike and with the rye. Um, we won't get a chance to talk about. You also did do an American single malt, um, so maybe we'll have you back to talk on that as well. But with the rye, he, as you said, Mike's done a lot of work studying like the genetics of rye, the different, uh, just studying the genetics of rye. So Whiskey Acres, you guys take a slightly different tack with that, not only in how you handle the corn varieties you're using, but you're doing a vintage with your ryes, which is not, again, it's not what you're doing with your bourbons.
We do a vintage with our bonded
Oh, you
bourbon as
do.
well.
Oh, with
Yep.
well, with bonded, yes. Sorry, I should have said with bonded. Um, I guess I meant with the, like the 7-year-old that I have is not
Not eight or not year
not
state.
not year stated, right? So I guess simplest question is, I know it's a relatively smaller part of your business than the bourbon is, or the corn whiskeys are. So, why do the vintage with rye?
Because what it has become is what we consider to be one of the most special ryes on the market. Um, you know, Rye for whatever reason ages out a little bit more quickly. And so, when we sort of had those moments of people going, "Wow, this is great," that actually probably happened with our rye first, just because of the sort of the timeline of, and so we knew we were onto something special, and we decided that that's kind of the story that we want to tell. And again, that goes back to, the vintage we give it is actually, it's not the year that it was made, it's a harvest date or harvest year. And so, that again just goes back to our belief that the farm is such a fundamental and important part of this process. And so, it's not a year of distillation or a year of bottling. It's a year of crop year. And so you'll see that in our bonded rye, you'll see that in our bonded bourbon. And we think that's a differentiator that's in the marketplace, and that we'll continue to do that.
Sure. So the
It's a story to tell. We can, if I look back and, there's something that's like Harvest 2019. 2019 was the wettest spring on record in DeKalb, Illinois. Um, we actually were barely able to get a corn crop planted here, and had to actually get some corn from my dad and my farm to do some of the work, that get corn for some of the work Rob needed to do on his master's thesis experimentation. Um, so as we kind of look back, for me personally, and I see something that says Harvest 2019, I think of the hell that we went through that year to attempt to get a crop in the ground. And, just because of rye is a different cadence of when it's planted and harvested. I think the 2019 rye had less problems, from a growing standpoint. And so to us, it tells us more than just, it's some cases a good memory, in some cases a bad memory of what happened that year.
I like that. Okay, and that could be a good story to be either on a I mean, I think of it always as content because that's just what I do.
Yep.
But I'm like, you look at a, I like to be able to look at a website and be like, okay, I bought the 2019 vintage. Why do they do it? And to put it bluntly, like, why should I care? Like, why? What is the story of this? And see that story. I love that. It's interesting. It gives you a reason again why you should care that this particular vintage might taste different, might be different in some way. So no, I love that. Just wanted to make sure to ask about it. Um, in so my last question for you is about legacy. I've heard already in interviews, Jamie's pretty confident his son wants to be part of the distillery when he's old enough, and he's, ready to take this on the multi generational path. Um, I did not hear in the interviews anyone ask you about what your legacy, what you want your legacy to be at Whiskey Acres. So I want to give you a chance to talk about what you want yours to be.
Well, part of the difference is Jamie has his son is starting his sophomore or junior year in college, and my twin started third grade. So we're at very different uh, times of being parents and what our kids are doing. Um, I can answer that question a couple different ways. One is I'm very mindful. My kids are 8. So how much involvement are they going to have? But their last Friday of summer break, they came to the distillery with me, and they helped me do things. They helped me prepare for an event we are having the next day. You know, they are involved, periodically on site, but also, we have constant conversations at home about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Um, I grew up on a farm where, my dad taught me things like how to do things, but maybe not always like the why, like the business side of things. And so, I try to be very, very meticulous about explaining and helping them understand and come up with ideas about the business. Um, my daughter is a performer. So, she's already claimed that when she's old enough, she wants to be here and sing and be one of our weekend talents. My son is meticulous and smart and detailed. And, I suspect in about 3 or 4 years, we could turn the bookwork over to him and really, I'm being sarcastic here, but, they come with very different skill sets. All that being said, I'm part of this distillery that's on a different farm than where I grew up. For me, one of my sort of symbols of success here is that I can take some of the success that we've had here and buy some farm ground that's attached to where I grew up. And there's a very specific piece of land in my dad's neighborhood that I'd love to bring back to the family. And the way that I will be able to do that is success here. And as that relates to the kids, my son Gunner is 8. He helps, goes down to Grandpa's farm with me, and he asks, what's going to happen with Grandpa's when Grandpa's gone? And he's like, can I run it? And I'd really like my success here to be something that enables his success down the road.
Love it. With that, we'll put a pause for now on Whiskey Acres until I can visit in person and see even more and taste more products as well. Um, I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you, Nick, so much for taking the time tonight to talk about Whiskey Acres, talk about your own history and how we got here. Hang on with me for just a minute after I finish the recording.
My pleasure. And thanks for your time and platform. And let's not make it take 2 years to do this again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you everyone for listening. Like, rate, and subscribe. You can read the show notes. There'll be information about the products that I got to taste, more information we didn't cover in the interview itself. And again, thank you for listening. Like, rate, and subscribe. I'll see you all next week.